Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the briefing room. Coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News, I'm John Santucci. A busy Tuesday with you, and we are going to start on a story that does not seem to be slowing down. Immigration. What is happening on the border? What is happening in these facilities across the Texas border involving so many children? We're hearing the numbers. They are just staggering. 300 moved from a facility overnight because of horrible conditions. Lights on overnight, no food, no water, no cleaning products. It's a story that we just can't wrap our heads around. I want to go to ABC's Jim Avila, who is down on the ground. He's outside that facility that we've been learning so much about overnight down in Clint, Texas. Jim, I know you and the team were trying to get into the facility to figure out what is happening on the ground. What have you and the team seen so far?
Well, we are standing in front of, and this is pretty much the only view we're getting of the infamous facility here in Clint, Texas. You see once in a while some Border Patrol folks going in and out, but at the front door there's not exactly a sign welcoming anybody in, and we've been asking for days now for access to this location and not been allowed access. The only people who have been allowed in are the lawyers who represent children inside this facility, and they're the ones who first came outside with those horror stories. And in fact, they asked the Border Patrol to allow them to bring a pediatrician in. The Border Patrol said no at first, Customs and Border Patrol, Border Protection. They said no, but the lawyers threatened legal action, and in fact they did allow a pediatrician from Brownsville, Texas to come in, and she told us that what she found was a facility that she thought was like a torture facility, that the children inside were mostly dirty, that they had no access to soap or toothpaste, that they, in fact, as you said, John, had trouble sleeping because the lights were on 24 hours a day and not dimmed for sleep at night. These are kids, and this is what was going on here.
Yeah, Jim, I mean, the stories are just horrible from what we're hearing. You mentioned the pediatrician. Your longtime colleague, Serena Marshall, and mine, of course, spoke to that pediatrician over the weekend. She detailed that story for us here yesterday. But, Jim, I'm curious, you know, one of the images that we were caught by today was the Texas Tribune showed a Good Samaritan trying to bring goods to one of the facilities down there, turned away. Are you seeing anybody around the facility, people that are just curious, trying to see what's happening inside?
Occasionally you'll see a honking or hear a honking of a horn as people go by, but I think the message is out that the Border Patrol, the Border Protection Agency, is not accepting any of those donations. It's against their policy. So even though independent observers are saying that there's no soap and there's no toothbrush and there's only blankets that are those aluminum type, that the agency is not accepting any donations. So people are not coming anymore. Mostly they were coming over the weekend and were turned away. We had a briefing this morning by people from the agency who would not allow themselves to be identified, who said that they deny that there's any problems going on in there. They brought 100 children back, in fact, here over the weekend and last night back into the facility. They're here again. And they claimed, the administration claims, that there's plenty of resources there, despite what the independent observers saw.
And of course, questions now mounting, Jim, as we saw the acting head of Customs Border Patrol step down earlier today, John Sanders. Jim, I know that you and the team are working on this. I know you're going to have more on World News Tonight and up online at abcnews.com. So keep us posted, and thank you for checking in with us. I do want to switch gears here, though, because Jim was just mentioning there that some Good Samaritans have been trying to go to these facilities, where, as I mentioned, we saw the cover of the Texas Tribune from earlier this morning. I want to bring in one of those Samaritans. His name is Austin Savage. He tried to get into that facility so many people are talking about down in Texas. He joins us now. Austin, thanks for taking a moment to speak with us. I appreciate it. Give me a sense, Austin, A, why did you want to go to one of these facilities, and what supplies were you trying to bring?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I mean, the action was just simply, it's just a response to what's occurring, you know? It's a reactive act, and you know, we were we were reading about these news stories about the conditions that these children, I mean, they're children, that these children were put in. And, the idea that we couldn't provide for them just obviously made no sense. So we took diapers and baby wipes and just toiletries, basic necessities, so that the excuse that the supplies were not available, couldn't exist. Unfortunately, when we arrived there, the entire facility, as Jim mentioned, was pretty much on lockdown. There's no responses. There was a helpline that apparently, or some assistance line that you could call, but no one answers on that. And pretty much we were outside with the supplies, and the only activity was a gate opening and closing and vehicles moving in and out. There were some agents in the cars who did see us, but they refused to acknowledge us. We tried to get their attention. I mean, even just to ask simple questions, but they have no desire to interact with us.
and Austin, I know you spoke to our producer, Victoria, before joining us, and you told her that you had dropped the supplies off, and then gone back to see what happened and noticed everything was still there.
Well, interestingly enough, when we arrived, there was a small bag that had been left before us, and there was a little note there. And, and we were unsure when we were there, and obviously we were getting no response, and we were unsure as to what to do, whether we could leave them there and they would be passed on. So we actually packed things up and went back the next day.
Oh, wow.
And when we showed back up, we went Sunday initially, we went back yesterday, and we showed back up yesterday. We had the exact same scenario played out. The facility's on lockdown, no one will talk to you. And some of the supplies were still there. Some had vanished overnight. I'm not sure what happened to those. But as for our contribution, we actually just decided we wanted to make sure that even if we couldn't give them directly to CBP, that they would go to good. So we took them to a nearby shelter in San Eli.
Well, we actually asked the CBP to comment on what you did down in Texas. They told us, quote, "We're using operational funding to provide those things, but those things are available now, and they have been continuously." They go on to tell us, "We are looking at the possibility of using some of those donations going forward, but those items, it's important to know, are now available." That's a statement from Customs and Border Patrol to ABC this afternoon. Austin, thank you for joining us. And listen, I do hope that some of the supplies you and your friends donated were able to get to someone that needed them.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah, thank you. President Trump was actually asked about this situation just moments ago in the Oval Office, about the images, about the stories coming out, about what's happening to children in these facilities. Take a listen to what the president said in the Oval Office moments ago.
We're moving some people around into different locations. The game has changed a lot because of what Mexico is doing. We're able to do things that we wouldn't have been able to do before. The problem with our Border Patrol, who are phenomenal people, but they're not allowed because the laws are so bad with catch and release and all of the different things, including chain migration, the visa lottery. The laws are so bad, and the asylum rules and laws are so bad that our Border Patrol people, who are so incredible, aren't allowed to do their jobs.
President Trump speaking earlier today in the Oval Office. There's also been some video that we've been seeing from earlier today. I want to warn you, it is quite disturbing. It shows a father and his 11-year-old child trying to cross the border. It's an image that has had so many of us today aghast at what is happening at the border. I do want to bring in ABC's John Cohen. He's a contributor for us. He's the former Undersecretary for the Department of Homeland Security. John, I'm sure you've seen this image. I don't know how anybody looks away from it, to be honest. It's heartbreaking. What's your thoughts on this, John? What's your thoughts on what's happening on the border right now?
Well, it is a heartbreaking image, and it's one of a number of tragedies that we're hearing about occurring at the southern border that is illustrative of the fact that conditions over the past several years have deteriorated, and they've deteriorated significantly. The laws haven't changed. I'm a little bit confused by what the president is saying, because the laws that the Obama administration operated under are the same laws that are in effect today. Yet we are seeing a decrease in removals through interior enforcement, and we're seeing a dramatically worse situation at the southern border. The reason why the conditions have worsened are a combination of several factors. One, conditions in the Central American countries where these people are coming from have worsened. There's more violence, there's more poverty. The economy in the United States has strengthened, and that serves as a place where people want to come to be able to provide for their family. And as numbers began to increase going back multiple months, the federal government didn't do what it's done in past years, which is bring the U.S. government, different organizations together, find resources, and address the surge. And instead, you have a situation where CBP does not have the resources they need to deal with the situation. They're not getting the support from other federal government agencies that they need. And for some reason, to exacerbate the situation, a number of policies were put into place which actually made it more difficult for people to be processed as they were seeking asylum, in an effort to sort of deter people from doing it. And that just added to the conditions.
John, I'm curious. Obviously, before coming over and helping us understand these things, you did have a long career at the Department of Homeland Security. John Sanders, the acting chief of Customs and Border Patrol, announced that he is stepping down. We're still trying to figure out the circumstances around his resignation and if it had to do with what we're seeing down at the border right now. But I'm curious, John, obviously there are political appointees, and then there are careers, people who have been working at these agencies for some time, like many of the acting folks we're seeing ascend to these positions now as the president's unable to fill them. What are you hearing from perhaps former friends, colleagues of yours who are still there about this situation?
Well, I think for a large number of people, there's a lot of frustration. There is expertise that exists within the Department of Homeland Security, whether it's in Customs and Border Protection or ICE, that they know how to handle the situation at the border, and they've been in those agencies for a long period of time, and they've dealt with surges in the past. They also do other very important things that protect this country, and I think for many people, they feel that the political agenda of the administration is driving what's being done at the border versus the advice and counsel of those people who really understand operationally how to deal with it. So I think that's, for some, causing a lot of frustration.
It's definitely a story that we're going to be continuing to watch. And John Cohen, we appreciate you, as always, helping us break it down. Thank you, sir.
Talk to you soon.
You can find all the latest on this developing story up at abcnews.com. And of course, we're going to have a full report tonight on ABC's World News. Let's switch gears, though. The president also taking heat on Iran. His decision last week, as we know, to call off a strike on Iran. Then he announced yesterday that he was going to be placing new sanctions. Now the Iranian president has responded, and the president of the United States is not exactly liking what the Iranian president had to say. Let's bring in two of our colleagues for this one. ABC's Connor Finnegan is over at the State Department, and ABC's Meredith McGraw over at the White House. Meredith, let's start with you. The president responding to the Iranian president who overnight basically, for lack of a better word, attacked the mental fitness of the president, of his administration. What did we hear from President Trump today?
Obliteration. That was the message that President Trump had for the Iranians this morning on Twitter. It's the latest in a series of insults and threats between President Trump and Iranian leadership after, of course, President Rouhani said the White House is, quote, afflicted by mental retardation, and said they are permanently closing doors to diplomacy. Now, in a series of tweets this morning, President Trump said the statements were, quote, ignorant and insulting, and after, brandishing U.S. military might, said, quote, any attack by Iran on anything American will be met with great and overwhelming force. In some areas, overwhelming will mean obliteration. And President Trump has said that he doesn't want a war here. He is open to negotiating. National Security Advisor John Bolton said the same thing, but these tweets here are really ramping things up and seem to contradict the message that the United States is potentially willing to negotiate.
Let's go over to Foggy Bottom, where Connor Finnegan is. Connor, in his response, the Iranian president said that if you were trying to have a relationship here, trying to have a dialogue, why shoot back with sanctions by the United States?
Yeah, that's right, John. The Iranians actually say that the U.S. is the one that has closed the door here. Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif tweeting a short while ago that by leaving the nuclear deal, the U.S. said that they didn't want to negotiate. The president and his advisors at this point say that they're trying to increase the pressure on Iran so much so that they'll come and talk and negotiate a more comprehensive agreement. But it's difficult to see how Iran would ever be willing to do that. And the U.S.'s close allies here so far continue to back Iran, continue to say that they support the Iran nuclear agreement and they want Iran to continue to abide by it. Importantly, we're coming up on a very key deadline that Iran is imposed on itself, really. They say that by Thursday, if the Europeans do not do enough to make up for the U.S. sanctions, that they will begin to enrich uranium at levels above what is allowed in the deal.
Connor Finnegan over at the State Department, thank you. And Meredith, before we let you go, we have a new White House press secretary. First Lady Melania Trump tweeting out that Stephanie Grisham, her longtime advisor and one of the last few people in the White House that they can say they were part of the original Team Trump, taking over for Sarah Sanders. Sanders, of course, announcing a little over a week ago that she would be stepping down after being with the president for a little over 3 years. Grisham, Meredith, is someone that many of us in the press have come to know, have come to deal with.
That's right. It's somebody that you worked with when you were covering the campaign yourself. Grisham joined the campaign in 2015. She initially started in the West Wing as a deputy press secretary under Sean Spicer, the first of now 3 press secretaries this White House has seen. And then she joined the East Wing, and there she was part of the First Lady's really close, tight-knit team. She's also been known for some of her fiery statements. Who can forget her pushing out, helping the First Lady push out then Deputy National Security Advisor Mira Ricardel, her response to the First Lady's very confounding jacket when she went down to the border. But she is a known figure here in the White House. And like I said, she's the 3rd press secretary that this White House has seen now in just 2.5 years.
Yeah, and a rare person in the White House to have the trust of both the West Wing and the East Wing.
Exactly.
As she takes over as the 3rd press secretary. Meredith, thank you very much. And to Stephanie, we look forward to joining you someday here in the briefing room. Come on down, me, Devin, whoever you like. Let's switch gears. Moving over to 2020, we are getting ready for the first Democratic debates. They're taking place for 2 nights this week down in Miami, Florida. ABC's Rick Klein, our political director, is getting ready. Rick, what do we have in store for the big night?
Hey there, John. Yeah, the stage is set in Miami, or should I say the stages are set. An unusual arrangement. 20 candidates spread across 2 days. Random drawings, but it doesn't look so random when you see how many candidates are backloaded on the second night. Elizabeth Warren, really the only major candidate, the only top polling candidate on that first night on Wednesday night. But these are going to be some unique challenges for the candidates because of the format of these debates. 10 candidates spread across 2 hours means not a lot of talking time. Each candidate will get a minute to respond to a question, 30 seconds when called on by one of the moderators for a rebuttal. You do the math and you recognize that when you put in commercial breaks and questions from the moderators, maybe 8 or 9 minutes tops is what the candidates are looking at. It puts a premium on sound bites. It puts a premium on candidates that are able to deliver concise messages. And it's a big opportunity, particularly for some of the lower polling candidates to have a breakthrough moment. The eyes of the political world will be upon them in Miami for at least a night or 2. John?
Rick Klein, our political director. Thank you, Rick. You can catch all of ABC's coverage of the first Democratic debates. They're going to be happening here on our network after they are aired. Analysis with the team beginning at 11 p.m. Devin Dwyer, Rick, Mary Alice Parks, the whole group are going to be leading the charge. And 2 other people who are going to be a part of our coverage are embeds. We're joined right now by Cheyenne Haslett and Adam Kelsey. They cover 2 of the many Democratic candidates. Actually, more than that. You have, what, 3 each, something like that?
A few candidates.
A few candidates?
We're losing track of the numbers, just like everybody else is.
Okay, well, listen, we wanted to have the 2 of you on because one of the big issues we're going to be talking about here is how to deal with student debt, how to deal with the mountains and mountains of debt. We've heard plans. You both cover 2 of the candidates that have already put out plans, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Cheyenne, start with you. So what's the breakdown?
Sure. So with the plan we see from Elizabeth Warren, there is a component to make all public college 2- and 4-year tuition free, and then there's a component to cancel a certain amount of debt. And the way it works is on a sliding scale based on your income. So we start at households that make $100,000 a year. They'll have $50,000 of debt wiped out. And then from there, it's the more you make, the less relief you'll see under the plan, up to $250,000 a year per household. So what that looks like, according to estimates from independent analyses, is 75% of American households will see debt completely relieved, and then 95% of households will see some relief. And that comes out to $640 billion. And the portion for free tuition is $650 billion.
And does she also call for free tuition at public universities?
Yes, 2- and 4-year public universities. Okay. That's the $650
So now that's Elizabeth Warren. That's an area that Bernie Sanders, Adam, agrees with her on. Where are they different on their plans?
Yeah, agrees with her basically on free college tuition, 2- and 4-year universities, like Cheyenne was talking about. When it comes to student loan debt forgiveness, Sanders makes it very simple. If you have a student loan, you're still paying it off. You have that debt, it is completely wiped out. Doesn't matter if you've got a couple $1,000s or $100,000. Doesn't matter what your income is right now, whether you're a public school teacher, whether you're a hedge fund manager, a doctor, a lawyer, what have you. Every single person in the United States of America with an outstanding student loan is going to have it wiped out under Sanders' plan.
Okay, so now both of those plans, they obviously sound great, but this is where we need a reality check, and thank God we have an economist to join us right now. Bola Shakunbi, who is a frequent guest here on the Briefing Room. She's also with Clever Girl Finance. Thank you so much for being with us, Bola. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So, Bola, you've just heard a breakdown on two of these plans. We've obviously got 22 and growing. What are we up to right now? 24 candidates? Where are we right now?
23,
something like that. So we'll have like 23, 25 plans by the end of the week, Bola. Reality check. Where do these stand? Is it possible to fund these plans?
I mean, so it really depends. When you think about how, student loans work today, we know that on average the average student is graduating from college about $40,000 in debt. We know that there are 44 million people who have one form of student loan debt or the other. And we know that this burden is at $1.6 trillion. So, from an individual perspective, we would all love our student loans to be eliminated or forgiven. That would be amazing. But we also need to consider what the impact is going to be and if it actually is applicable to everyone the way that it's being stated.
And what do you think, Bola? I mean, as so many people try to figure out how to pay off student loans, one of the biggest pitfalls we actually found for me and my wife was private loans. The fact that they keep getting sold off and separated, and you don't end up know who you're paying at the end of the day, which is a fun little puzzle you get to play at the end of every month. But what are some of the pitfalls that people often find themselves in that perhaps the Democratic candidates that are trying to make headway, they could actually try to address something with?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest issues is not knowing exactly what you signed up for way back when you were signing the dotted line in college, getting the student loans. A lot of people don't realize how many different loan accounts they might have or who they're actually paying, like you mentioned. Also, one of the biggest issues that a lot of people haven't actually sat down to factor out whether the amount of debt they're taking on is what they can actually pay off based on the career they're getting into, tied into the city that they're living. Can that career going to pursue actually support you paying off this student loan debt? And also, it's really important that people compare tuition across different schools, right, to make sure that they can pay it off as it relates to the career that they're getting into. And so these are all factors that people need to consider as they look into taking on debt. And if they do have debt, understanding what debt do I have and where is it sitting? And the best way to figure that out is to pull a copy of your credit report.
All right, Bola Shakunbi, Clever Girl Finance. Bola, thank you so much for that analysis. I appreciate it. And before we leave you today, just to talk to Cheyenne and Adam one more time, as I said, you both, between the two of you, cover 6 candidates. So that's about a third, give or take, a little more, a little less. Yeah, no, I'm a journalist.
Not a mathematician, right?
We don't do math. We failed math. That's why we're here. But, what do you two believe? You've been out there, you've been covering these candidates, you know their best lines, their worst lines, maybe they've even worked them out yet. What do they need to do, in your opinions, to break out? I said Warren, Sanders, I know you cover others. What do you think, Cheyenne?
Well, you've got an interesting dynamic right here in the candidates that we cover, Warren and Sanders, and they have two competitive proposals that are about debt cancellation, and I think they're both, we're not going to see them on the same night in the debates, but they're both up against this neck-and-neck battle in the polls, and what makes Warren candidacy different from a Bernie candidacy is really important to get the message to voters.
And Elizabeth Warren's on night one.
Yes.
Some people say that was a good draw for her based on who else is on that stage. Bernie, on the other hand, he's with everybody.
Well, he's with some of the big names. He's going to be standing right next to former Vice President Joe Biden. But as you were alluding to earlier, John, when I'm out on the trail with Bernie Sanders, when I'm looking around at voters in the audience in New Hampshire and in Iowa and some of these other early voting states, the times when they're starting to nod their heads in agreement with him is when he looks back at 2016 and he talks about becoming the thought leader of the Democratic Party. The proposals that he was putting out in 2016, things like free college tuition that now a number of Democratic candidates are all getting behind, those were considered really extreme ideas not even 4 years ago. Now everybody is trying to one-up each other, trying to be more progressive than the rest of the field. If he comes out on Thursday night during that second debate and he really makes this case that he's been the one pulling the party to the left, he's the one whose ideas everyone is now rallying around, that's how he can have a big victory.
Okay, Adam, Cheyenne, you're going to be joining our full political team down in Florida. Have fun. I'll give you some restaurant recommendations later. Before we leave you today, we're going to head back over to the White House because there's a first happening right now. President Trump has given out several Medal of Honors during his term in the White House. But we're seeing happening right now, and you see the president there on your screen, he is giving the Medal of Honor to the first living veteran of the Iraq War. That is David Balavia. And you got to imagine what a proud moment for him and his family over at the White House right now. And you can hear them there. You can find out more of David's story right now up at abcnews.com. We're going to leave you there for today. A reminder, you want to stick with us for full coverage of the first Democratic debates. Those begin right here on ABC News Live, 11 p.m. tomorrow night. But for now, I'm John Santucci. You are watching ABC News.